You are a space nerd, like so many of us in journalism. You might take the cake, though, because I've seen your shows. And I just want to talk to you about really how significant this is. I asked astronaut Peggy Whitson about all of the firsts with this mission. But what strikes you really as the most symbolic here?
Well, I have to tell you, I actually think about it as last. I think of this as the end of a cycle that's been going on for a long time. So first of all, we haven't seen a splashdown of a NASA crew since 1975. But what happened in 1994 is we had the first space challenge, the first private jet challenge, right? That was the X Prize challenge, and it was won in 2004. And what that did is it gave birth to commercial space flight. And depending on who you were, you thought about that as space tourism or mining in space or commercial travel to space. And what it did was it allowed NASA to get out of the business of transporting people using a shuttle, literally, to get people to the International Space Station, and to hand that over to commercial enterprises so that NASA could think about bigger things and new frontiers. And now to be able to see the first crew land safely on Earth, 15 miles an hour under those parachutes, tells us that we are toward the end of this thing. This means we are ready to think about beginning commercial space travel in a meaningful way, commercial space tourism in a new way. So I actually think that there are a number of firsts, but what you are seeing is proof of concept. This actually works, and that's why they want to be so careful. That's why they're checking before the astronauts have their egress, an aviation term, maybe before they come out of the pod. They want to make sure everything is locked down and completely safe. They've got surgeons ready for them. They're going to evaluate their health. They've been in communication with them. They seem to be doing well, but they need and want this to be perfect. Every space geek in the world, even at competing companies, is watching this launch. They are, their hearts are in their throat that it worked successfully, and they want to see those astronauts come out. They want to see Bob and Doug come out, and this today marks the beginning of a brand new age in space that little kids can look at and say, I also want to be an astronaut. I want to be a space traveler.
And we are watching and waiting for that hatch to be opened. And forgive me, Ali, if we have to cut you off when and if that happens. But you extensively covered this May 30th, the launch. The Dragon Endeavour ended up docking with the International Space Station a day later, May 31st. And at the time, there was a lot of concern about this being a first with the partnership between NASA and SpaceX. Discuss what some of those concerns were and whether this successful mission debunks any of that.
Well, so, you know, there's a lot of things, right? NASA is a government agency, and there are a lot of people who think there are benefits to having a government agency control what we do in space. There are a lot of people who think it's wasted money. Neither of those are true. It's definitely not wasted money, but it's also what's the level of involvement that the U.S. government should have on things like this, particularly since shuttling people to the International Space Station or sticking them into orbit or space tourism or space commerce may not be what taxpayers should be paying for, but maybe there's other applications. So the government contracted with Boeing and with SpaceX to do this. There are competitors, and you know there have been accidents in the past few years with space travel, but the fact is this marks a mission where you transfer some of that authority over to the private sector. There are a lot of people concerned about SpaceX. SpaceX is a company run by Elon Musk, and you know people wonder about what commercial motivations are in space and whether it'll be as safe as NASA space. But I will remind people that there have been accidents when it's commercialized. There have been accidents when it's a government-run operation, and the questions have always been, what do you hand over and what responsibility do people take and what sort of governance occurs with these type of missions? The bottom line is shuttling people to the International Space Station or cargo to and from space or even tourism probably is beyond the domain of what government needs to do right now. And space geeks like me think that the government should be involved in the things that are not doable by the private sector, that are higher risk, and that do need to be sort of a new frontier. But this has become like trucking cargo, and it's probably time to now start thinking about it that way, that let commercial enterprises do this. This only bodes well for increasing relationships between NASA and the private sector. There are many of them, by the way, and it's not going to be just SpaceX that's going to be involved in this, but this is, at the moment, the most successful completion of this relationship. To have these astronauts spend 63 days up in space, orbit the Earth, dock with the International Space Station, undock, come back into orbit, come back into Earth, and descend peacefully off the coast of Pensacola, and now just about ready to exit this thing, they'll be put on a helicopter back to Pensacola Naval Station. They'll be thoroughly tested, and this will make a lot of people think there is a future out there that we are now prepared to go and explore together.
Well, Ali, your excitement is infectious. Stick around for us. I want to bring in retired astronaut Peggy Whitson again. Peggy, we just heard they are purging the surface section, getting rid of the fumes around the seals. How are they doing that?
They're using probably nitrogen pressurization to purge from the capsule itself. They probably also have fans blowing on the deck. I'm not sure. I don't see any specifically, but that's probably also going on as well.
And the crew members who are there on that ship, they're wearing masks. Is that face masks because of coronavirus or face masks because of these fumes from the capsule?
It's probably both. They're going to isolate the crew and keep them isolated because of coronavirus, obviously. But they probably have masks on as well too for the fumes.
And you're now retired.
I can't tell the integrity of the mask they're wearing, so I don't know for sure if they're actually for the fumes.
You're now retired, so you haven't traveled through space in times of a global pandemic. How has that shaped this mission?
I think it probably is a little different. We always do a quarantine before flight to isolate our crews because we don't want them to take any viruses of any kind up to the space station. Even a cold bug is going to be given to everybody on board the station because it's a confined environment, a recycled, recirculated life support system. So everyone will get a virus if it's sent up there. So we do quarantines pre-flight. It's funny because we have doctors that run around and with thermometers and to take temperatures of people and keep you separated, and now we call it social distancing. so it's interesting that all the same procedures we did for our pre-flight quarantine we're putting in place and giving names to a little bit better.
You guys were doing it before it was mainstream.
Yeah, I guess so.
And talk to me about the perspective of the length of this mission. They've been in space for 2 months. Last hour when we talked to you, you said in the Apollo days, missions were maybe 10, 11 days. Now these space flights are getting longer and longer. Is 2 months significant?
2 months is significant. I've never flown that short, but I still think it's going to be more significant. Both Doug and Bob have flown before, but they also did shuttle missions, and they were only on orbit for about 14 days, 15 days. So this is going to be very different for them. Now, everybody comes back from flight differently. Some people get sick when they get up into space, and other people get sick when they come home. Some get sick both ways. Some don't get much sick at all.
Sick in what way?
And so every individual, vomiting.
Oh, yeah.
And so for me, it was coming home was the hard part, and that's when I would feel sick, not want to be moving around a whole lot, which is why there was some concerns about being on a spacecraft in the water where you'll be rocking for very much.
I have to know whether you took Dramamine before your descent back.
I took drugs, different drugs. They were of limited usefulness.
Well, I want to talk to you also. Bob and Doug have been away from their families for 2 months. They missed Father's Day. They were up in space. Of course, their first order of business will be to reunite with their families. But you spent cumulatively 665 days up there. What were some of the first things that you did when you came home?
Oh, getting a hug feels really special when you first get home, of course. But I really had cravings for food because I was tired of the same old stuff that we had on board the space station.
Yeah,
so my first flight,
stuff.
I wanted a steak. Yeah, my first flight, I wanted a steak. My second flight, I wanted a salad. And my third flight, I wanted pizza. So it was different every time.
Fascinating. And right now we're watching video again of that landing on the right side of the screen, those 4 parachutes coming down into the water. On the left side of the screen, these crews are trying to get rid of those fumes that could be potentially hazardous to the people there on their ship as they are reaching the coast. Let's talk about the mission ahead. We know that more astronauts are going to be going up again. Another SpaceX crew, possibly as early as September. Thankfully, this mission was successful, paving the way for future missions. What do you think their goals will be for this next time around?
Well, the next mission is going to be one of our normal space station missions. The crew will be up there for 6 months. It's going to be a crew of 4 going up, so that'll be an additional person on board, which is pretty special. We'll get the crew of the space station up to a total of 7 that way. So that's exciting. But on board the space station, we have hundreds of different experiments going on all the time. There's spacewalks like ones that Bob participated in with the space station commander Chris Cassidy, and we do robotic deploys of different little payloads off of the porch outside that we have on the International Space Station. There's all kinds of experiments going on, and so it's pretty busy up there the whole time, which adding another person is going to greatly benefit, because we can get more done and get more of that research that even helps folks here on Earth.
And right now, it looks to me like this capsule is pretty beat up. We know that SpaceX aims to recycle. How would they do that with this capsule? And maybe what I'm seeing is just cosmetic.
It is just cosmetic. They have recycled numerous capsules that they used for cargo previously. And so this is pretty routine for them to reuse the vehicles. And so they'll get it cleaned up, and they'll have to do a lot of testing to ensure that there was no damage done during the mission, but they will reuse the capsule. When I was on board the space station, we had one of the cargo vehicles, a SpaceX cargo vehicle, arrived, and it had been used twice before.
I want to bring in Ali Velshi again, if he's still on the phone with us. Ali, are you there?
Yep.
Ali, we're watching this beautiful video. We no longer have it up on the screen. Beautiful video of the capsule just kind of majestically coming back down. There it is again. We talked about the significance of this splash landing. Of course, Hurricane Isaias changing the plans completely. But tell me what you were thinking at the time when you saw this.
Well, listen, I get so excited about landings and takeoffs. Rockets. MSNBC at one point made a promo of me just watching a landing and watching a takeoff, because I just can't get enough of it. So I don't know. It's weird when I see it happen. I just think of all of the hope of humanity all at once. And one thing that every astronaut I've ever talked to says to me, that there's something you will never feel if you're not an astronaut. That when you leave and you look back on Earth, or you're in orbit and you look back on Earth, somehow the things that we all fight about and the things that we all disagree about come into sharp focus. So every time I see an astronaut come back to Earth, I think here we are, populated by 1 or 2 more people. These 2 have been in orbit before, been in space before, but who understand that the things we can do together are just bigger. When I watch space missions, and I was at the last day launch of the shuttle in person, I think to myself, this is the thing that's bigger than all of us. This is the thing that's going to help us understand what's possible and what we can do. Because, Lindsay, you and I live in a world where we are very focused on the things that don't happen, and the things we don't do, and the disagreements we have. And I look to space and I think to myself, that is the one thing that, in theory, we can all agree upon. There are disagreements about whether this should be taxpayer funded. I happen to believe it should be. How much the government should do and how much the private sector should do, and safety and regulation. And I think those are all really important conversations. But the idea that this is something not just Americans, but humanity does together is what I see every time I see a takeoff and every time I see a landing or a touchdown or a splashdown like today. And I haven't seen many splashdowns in my day. That tells me that really anything is possible. This makes the optimistic side of me blue.
Yeah, we really could use it right now, but couldn't have said it better myself. You know, when you go out and you look at the stars, you realize how small you are. We did just hear the crew say the hatch opening procedures are to begin soon, so hopefully that means that their attempts to remove some of those hazardous fumes from the seals have been successful. Ali, you said you haven't seen a whole lot of splash landings in your time. Of course, the last time this happened for Americans was 1945. Let's talk about the significance of the splashdown and really appearing to go off without a hitch. We're watching the video, the replay right now.
Yeah, look, one of the things that a lot of people of a certain age who follow space forget about is that the one fascinating thing about the shuttle is that they land like an airplane, right? That is remarkable. The level of control you have over things when you can land this thing like an airplane is remarkable. When we got rid of the shuttle program, it does become important in commercial space to understand control over landing. How much can you control? How much can you move it? And how is that done? And we saw all of that in this mission. We saw the craft moved around so that it would be positioned properly for landing. We saw it come in. We saw the parachutes deploy. We saw it come down at 15 miles per hour, which is really great to see that majesty of that thing landing. And we saw it land exactly where they had hoped that it would land. And then we saw it picked up. And now we're going to see these two astronauts come out of the hatch. They'll be transported by helicopter. But this is the issue, right? The most dangerous part, generally speaking, of any kind of aviation, but space flight in general, is the initial stages when you take off and the landing stages, right? And if you're outside of orbit, coming back into orbit. These are the things that have to be mastered. So no one who is watching this should underestimate the science and the engineering that has gone into making something that looks so effortless so successful. So when you see that come down under the parachutes, it looks like it happened the way it was supposed to happen, and it did. And that has taken years of engineering and science and piloting and aviation to make that happen. And that's part of the beauty that I see in it. It looks so simple, but what we are looking at is so hard and so complicated. And the fact that humans can figure that out and do it tells me that what else is out there that we can solve? I worry about climate change all the time, but I think, wow, this is really rocket science. We actually have the ability to do this, so there's nothing we can't do.
Yeah, to go from 17,500 miles an hour just down to
an hour.
Just incredible, just with the help of those parachutes there. And also, just as you mentioned, the precision. I mean, they landed outside of Pensacola. It was one of 7 landing sites that they had identified, possibly for the splashdown because of Hurricane Isaias. Talking about coronavirus with Peggy Whitson, it has changed things. It has changed things with this mission. The people we see on board wearing masks. I asked retired astronaut Peggy Whitson whether that was because of the pandemic or because potentially those hazardous fumes. She said maybe both. But Ali, what can you tell us, since you covered the launch so extensively and we were already amidst this global pandemic, how things have been different this time around?
Yeah, look, so one thing that Peggy was just talking about, which is really important, is the degree to which everybody gets sick, right? One of the things that pilots do, or astronauts do, is they go into these parabolic flights so that you test your system with nausea, things like that. But sickness generally, germs, the things that we take for granted here on Earth, are all things that have to be super, super, super regulated in space. So there have been missions scrapped in the past. There have been astronauts that have pulled off missions because they can't entirely identify what's happening before they take off. So they make sure that everybody's in perfect health. And as you know, there have been experiments in space about how your body reacts and how your body changes. Some experiments are just about that. Scott Kelly went into space just to see how he changed. And Scott Kelly and Mark Kelly, twins, are actually a different size now because Scott Kelly shrunk a little bit in space. So they are hyper vigilant about that. What you don't want to do after millions of dollars of work and the best research in the world and timing and negotiations with the government and publicity is to have something go wrong for health reasons. So they were very, very, folks who do stuff like this, who live on the edge and work on the edge, tend to practice a lot greater safety with respect to their health. They were taking no risks, even though coronavirus was not as big as it is a deal now when they took off 63 days ago. It was still a big enough deal that they had to control the environment all around them, and specifically with those astronauts. So again, it will all be part of the study of their health as they come out. As soon as they come out, they will be met by surgeons who will, flight surgeons who will determine immediately what their vitals are. They'll take their temperature, they'll take their blood pressure, things like that. But they'll be monitoring them very closely. But I think you could be pretty well assured they didn't take coronavirus into space with them, and they didn't develop any symptoms over the 63 days that they were up there. That doesn't mean that they're out of the woods with respect to anything else, but because there may be a compromised medical state that they are in, having been up there for 63 days and having come in through this launch, which, as Peggy says, does do a bit on your system. I mean, 15 miles an hour, but that's 15 miles an hour faster than most of us hit Earth in the morning, right? Most of us take our feet out of our beds. So they do not want them compromised in any fashion. It would affect their ability to determine the effect of this trip on their body if anybody were to get coronavirus, which is why they're being so careful about everything, including those fumes. I think Peggy would agree. There's no particular danger in anything catching fire at this point. They're in a contained environment; they could contain it, but they don't want anything out of the normal, out of the ordinary happening, which is why they are taking such care to determine the nitrogen dioxide levels before they open that hatch and let them out.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I didn't even think about the fact that their immune systems could be compromised after this 2-month mission. Of course, they'll be leaving that capsule right now, and the pandemic still has its grips on our nation. Ali Velshi, I'm so happy that you're going to be sticking with us. We're going to keep you around for a little bit. We just heard that the procedures for hatch opening will be taking place in a little less than 5 minutes, so we're looking forward to that. We did hear Bob and Doug, the astronauts, on board. They've been in this capsule the whole time since splashdown, of course, since undocking from the International Space Station. It was a 19-hour trip to come back to Earth, and they just reported they feel good. They say they feel A-OK. And Ali, I remember when you were covering the launch back at the end of May, I believe the launch was actually scrubbed because of weather. Are you surprised that the return still happened given Hurricane Isaias?
There's a piece of me that thought that it might be delayed, but obviously, these things are not left to chance, right? And when you're in a launch, there are various groups. It's not one person who makes that decision. There are various groups who make the decision about whether that launch will take place. It can be scrubbed for any reason, including a bad battery. But weather is one of the reasons that becomes the most public typically. It's the same thing with these landings. Everybody's got to sign up on this. There is nobody who wants to be responsible for the wrong decision because of weather. So they've had to have a lot of consultation. I tend to really trust the NASA folks and the SpaceX folks, because I know how much goes into this and how many reputations are riding on it, and how much of the future of space travel rides on getting this right every time, or at least as many times as possible. They tend, they're not like me, where I'm sort of looking outside and thinking, well, you might start raining in a few minutes. They're really good at this. So when I heard that the splashdown was going to continue, I was pretty satisfied. They're risk takers, but they're not risk takers for the wrong reason.
And NASA says they talk about how they decide these return locations. Again, Pensacola, one of 7 splashdown sites considered. Pensacola is where they landed. But they prioritize locations which require the shortest amount of time between undocking and splashdown. There's just a ton of considerations there. So obviously that is why they chose the location. Again, for those of joining us on the right, you're watching video of that splashdown of this SpaceX capsule, the Dragon Endeavour. On the left, we're still waiting for that unhatching. They splashed down almost an hour ago now. Then it took about 25 minutes for them to get on a boat. That is where they currently are, as they are going back to the coast, going through some procedures, making sure there are no toxic fumes around those seals before they open that hatch for both of these astronauts to come out, and then they'll be evaluated by medical personnel. Eventually, they will be on a flight back to Houston. But Ali, we're talking about first. You had mentioned this is kind of the end of an era, the beginning of a new era in terms of space travel. And what do you see in the near future that's realistic? We know there's going to be another mission already in September, but when we talk about things like space tourism, how likely is that to be something that we're talking about in the next year or two?
Well, look, space tourism, it's been a long time before space tourism is an accessible thing, right? Generally speaking, there have been some version of space tourists, by the way. There have been private people who have gone up into certain vehicles, particularly Russian vehicles, and gone up into space, and they're astronauts. But space tourism is very, very, very expensive. It's going to be a while before it becomes accessible. The way space is going to be accessible to humanity is 2 ways. One is through commercialization, so stuff that has to go back and forth from the International Space Station will be handled by companies like SpaceX and others. Will basically be like cargo trucks. They'll be like 18-wheelers to the International Space Station. Then there's going to be other commercial enterprise. It's not just for that, but it's for commercial missions. There are obviously Virgin Galactic is in the business of space tourism. They've sold out hundreds of tickets for people to go up into space, and that will happen. But the price of that is still very, very high. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per mission, and that's not going to be in our immediate future. But people like Elon Musk, part of the reason he succeeds in these things is because he thinks really big, right? Elon Musk thinks he's going to be buried on Mars. He thinks there are going to be villages that are going to be, occupied up there. And he's got money and resources, and he raises money from people to do these things. And the beauty of humankind is that we do think big. So while there are those of us who are preoccupied with politics and important things that we need to be preoccupied with, the space crew tends to be people who live either on the edge, people like Peggy, who are at the top of their abilities in terms of their technical astronaut abilities or engineering abilities or things like that, and other people who tend to be a bit over the edge in terms of how they think about stuff. So the space community is populated by people who think about what it really looks like to succeed in space. And that's the kind of people who make this happen. There are some people who want the scientific discoveries that come from these things. There are some who want, the Star Trek-y kind of stuff about exploring strange new worlds. But I do think, and I'd love to get Peggy's perspective on this at some point, Peggy's seen this through the NASA-administered space programs that did amazing things that make little kids like me want to be an astronaut, and the shuttle program that made people say, that's more of what I do, starting from the moon, starting from 1959, 50 years ago. Now we are looking at 60 years ago now almost. Now we are looking at a different kind of thing, but it should be as motivating to the little kids. The little kids are who keep the space program going, right? The little kids who want to be astronauts, grow up to be astronauts, who do it. So when I say I see this as an end, I see this as the end of the transition out of the government-run space programs into the privately run space programs that make it even more accessible to more people to be astronauts or space travelers.
I want to bring in now NBC's Kathy Park, who I believe is joining us on the phone. I believe they just opened the hatch. No, they have not yet. They did say they were about a minute away from opening the hatch. All their procedures are complete. They've been saying it is a flawless flight. Kathy, what can you tell us from your perspective?
Yeah, so I have...
We're just about ready to open the Space Traveler's hatch and embarking upon two individuals who went up into space, and it appears that all is well. A successful mission. I always find it to be very interesting in watching the first Apollo that went up with a monkey in it, and then a few months later they finally brought a human being into that same atmosphere. I thought it was pretty neat that that space aviation was born during a time that I was just a youngster. Right now we're filming this live off of MSNBC, and now they're opening the hatch.
The hatch is now open. Hatch being opened at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. Hatch is open.
So right now they're going to put a piece of equipment in there that basically smooths out the edges and makes sure that it is a comfortable exit from the Dragon capsule. Just a little piece of structure there to ensure that the hatch will remain open and that any sharp edges around that side hatch are protected.
The blue suit there, that's one of NASA's flight surgeons for the crew. That's Dr. Stephen Hart. And that hatch open coming at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. That's 19:59 Universal Time, or GMT.
keep in mind they have been in there now for
So once again, the
two and a
SpaceX
half
recovery
months.
team is now assisting NASA
This is their
astronauts
first
Bob
fresh
Behnken
air
and
that
Doug
they
Hurley, to exit
embarked
the
upon.
spacecraft.
Sorry, we got the hatch open just about 2 minutes ago. We paused for a little while as they were just detecting some trace amounts of some of the hypergol fuels. So we executed a series of purges. And then once those were down back in acceptable limits, we were able to then start with the egress.
So there we see a stretcher on deck. This is normal. This is part of the standard recovery procedure. And it is just simply to ensure Bob and Doug remain safe. Like we said, readjusting to gravity can be a little challenging. Dizziness can often occur, especially when you're on a boat. So this stretcher will just be used to a standard procedure to make sure that the astronauts make it over to the medical tent as easily and as comfortably as possible.
Yeah, as we discussed, the reintroduction to gravity from microgravity can be a bit jarring, especially on our vestibular system, so the stuff responsible for our balance. And as they are on a ship underway, we just want to make sure we're taking every possible precaution to ensure that their arrival is safe and free from any injury now that they are home. They're working to get a few of the items from the seats out of the way first before they begin extracting our crew members. They'll be coming out one at a time.
As we saw during the ascent portion of this mission, there is enough room inside the capsule for them to do a backflip in microgravity. However, considering there's a couple folks in there right now from the recovery team.
Got you loud and clear.
Quick comm check there between Dragon and Mission Control here.
Solo from the PLC. I just wanted to thank you guys for bringing us home safe before I disembarked from the ship Endeavour. I'm sure Doug will have some good words for you guys as well. But thank you for doing the most difficult parts and the most important parts of human space flight, getting us into orbit and bringing us home safely. Thank you again for the good ship Endeavour.
Thank you, Bob, for those awesome words. It's absolutely been an honor and a pleasure to work with you from the entire SpaceX team. It's been awesome.
Roger that.
Some initial words from NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. He's in the pilot seat. So
all right, everybody, they opened the hatch. Right now we are waiting for astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken to disembark from the Dragon Endeavour. We just heard Bob thank the crew for getting them home safely. They're going to be placed on a stretcher. First, they're going to disembark one at a time, be placed on a stretcher. That's normal, that's standard. They'll be taken to the medical tent as comfortably as possible, and that's because, of course, they've been used to microgravity, and so having to adjust might be a little jarring for them. I want to bring in retired astronaut Peggy Whitson to talk about some of the tests that these astronauts will undergo in the medical tent.
Well, one of the first things they'll do is a neurovestibular test, just to see, watch your eyes. You tend to have what's called nystagmus, where your eyes are bouncing around a little bit because they aren't quite used to the whole gravity thing again. And you do different, nose touching, finger touching little tests, if they're feeling good enough, they'll have them do some walking tests as well. So it's relatively simple stuff, but they just want to test the crew members' reflexes and make sure everything's normal.
And Doug Hurley is the first astronaut to disembark from the SpaceX capsule. I also want to bring in retired astronaut Chris Hadfield. Chris, during our coverage the last couple hours, we've been talking to Peggy about some of the effects that astronauts might feel after being in space for 2 months, but it might be different for everybody. So what were some of the effects that you felt when you disembarked and the coming days and weeks and even months?
Yeah, it's really proportionate to how long you were in space. You know, if you've only been up for a week or two, like on the space shuttle, it's really not so bad. Your body still hasn't adapted. But after you've been up 2 months, like these guys were, or as long as Peggy's been, your body is very used to being weightless. And so it doesn't know what to do with gravity. It thinks something horrible has happened inside you, and it thinks maybe you ate something poisonous or something, a neurotoxin. And so that's why a lot of people get nauseous and your body makes you want to throw up. It's just trying to protect you from what historically might have caused you to feel so weird and so bad. And also, they're putting that stretcher out for the guys. That's mostly so that it slows down the readaptation, so the doctors can really get the maximum amount of information from what's happening to their bodies. It's a wonderful way to understand how the human body works, how the balance system is integrated and everything else. And so it's good to just leave them lying down, of course, for their safety, but also because it slows down the readaptation so the doctors can get a more complete data set. And fundamentally, that's the main reason they're doing it, of course, is for the science that's involved.
And Bob Behnken just disembarked, gave a thumbs up for all good. And Chris, since I have you on the phone, I have to ask you, people around the world will recognize your face for educational, informative, even entertaining videos. You taught us so much in your time in space about science. How excited are you for the resurgence of the space program?
I think this is huge. Everyone watched this like it was normal. This is the first time that this spaceship has ever carried people. I mean, it is a hugely complicated and very dangerous thing to do. And it's a huge credit to NASA, but very much to SpaceX, their engineers and the brilliance that they've exhibited, so that we can make something so hard look so easy. And it really bodes well for what's coming next. Vehicles that can not only just take it to the space station and back, but go further. The deep 3-day trip to the moon, start staying permanently on the surface of the moon, and eventually across that 6-month ocean in between here and Mars. Today, I think, was just a terrific step towards that, of showing just what we're capable of.
And we're waiting for Doug Hurley to disembark the SpaceX capsule as well. Bob Behnken already did so, giving a thumbs up. Looks like, asking my producer Justin if that could be Doug that I'm seeing right there. But Chris, since I have you on the phone, I want to ask you again, what happens after the medical tent? Yep, okay, we're looking live pictures. They're wheeling him out right now. We got a really cool vantage point right now from the side. Chris, they'll be looked at in the medical tent. What happens after that? Will they immediately be whisked off into a helicopter en route and eventually to Houston? What will happen? What a shot right there. Look at that.
It all happened. Yeah, it's great to see. And it's great to see the ship so healthy and the crew members. But yeah, they got to get in the medical tent, get into some clean, dry clothes. They've been sweating for quite a while.
Team clapping.
A chance to throw up if they need to, a chance for the doctors to really get a good look at them. And then get them off the ship, take them to the mainland, get them onto an airplane, get some really good medical data, and get them on the plane. It's not a very far hop now from Pensacola across Darlington Field in Houston. Get them into the laboratories and the test equipment at the Johnson Space Center there in Houston. That's all just going to go tick, tick, tick right now. One thing right after another. So that's what they got. They got a long day still ahead of them. And then they will get reunited with their spouses and their kids, which from their point of view, everything else is just compulsory, and that'll be the really sweet moment.
Oh, yeah, amazing that they've got a long day still ahead of them, considering their journey to Earth was 19 hours. We saw shortly, a short time ago, a quick standing ovation from Mission Control. And Chris, you had mentioned it's great to see this capsule in such great shape. Can you tell me what you're looking for? Because as a layman, I look at the capsule, I don't know what to look for in terms of the condition.
Well, they've obviously SpaceX has flown unpiloted versions, crewless, cargo versions, and when you put one, it's like putting something into a fire. It gets a regular burn pattern on it. You get used to that burn pattern. In this case, we know what the burn pattern around the unmanned versions look like, so it's really reassuring to me. And it looks kind of like a toasted marshmallow, just the way that it looks. And it's got the same toasted marshmallow patterns on it as I saw on the previous flights, and that's really reassuring. You don't want a surprise when the temperature was 3,000 degrees or more on the outside, plus with all the heavy deceleration. So you're just sort of guessing when you do it. You've got really good models and good testing, but someday you got to actually just go try it. Today we tried it, and it looked like the vehicle behaved, and now looks like the way we expect.
The hull got 3,000 degrees on the outside, but the material had to be built so that it didn't get that hot on the inside. You figure it was doing almost 18,000 miles an hour. It took a little more than 19 hours from the time it started its descension to actually come down and hit the water. It's just remarkable how tedious that all this stuff is, and one little bitty thing can go wrong that can be catastrophic for these people that put their lives on the line. As far as I'm concerned, they are the heroes of the 21st century. They are truly heroes, those who are willing to get up and go where no man have gone before in space exploration towards what that they do. It is a great accomplishment for NASA today that deserves 2 thumbs up.
We'll get a lot more data here shortly when the really sharp engineers at SpaceX dig into it. But from all indications so far, this was flawless. And that's a huge tribute to them and to the policies NASA's put in. The real important part of this, it really bodes well for the future. I think it's a great, big, important, successful first step.
Leave it to Chris Hadfield to put it all in terms that we can all understand, like a toasted marshmallow. Let's talk about this splash landing, because this is really unique. Hasn't happened since 1945. Were you surprised that the landing was still happening, given Hurricane Isaias threatening the return?
No, actually, the shuttle was far, far harder to land because we had to land it on a runway. The Dragon, and you said 45, but you meant to say 1975. But the Dragon can land in the water, and we got a lot of water, and you don't have to be accurate. You just land somewhere where you're not going to hit a boat. And so it gives you a lot more options. It's a lot simpler. Of course, if you land on the land, things can't sink. So you have to be careful, and they're being super careful with the procedures. They've done a great job. Eventually, SpaceX will figure out, I'm sure, how to land this on the land. But for a first test, this was a very reliable, safe, good way to do it. And it proved itself out today in that the crew's fine, the vehicle's fine, everything's recovered. And even when there was a hurricane or a tropical storm coming up the East Coast, we could still pretty much land on schedule and even closer to Houston. So it's a good way to do things, and I'm really happy for the result.
Incredible. We just got a wave from astronaut Doug Hurley, and of course both Doug and Bob Behnken will be looking forward to seeing their families and reuniting with them. We asked retired astronaut Peggy Whitson what were some of her first priorities. She said among her many missions, one time she craved a steak, another time she craved pizza. What were some of your priorities when you came down, apart from, of course, that wonderful hug from your family?
Yeah, my third flight, I flew in a capsule, the Russian capsule, and we landed in sort of the countryside, the prairies of Kazakhstan. So then there was a helicopter, actually a vehicle and a helicopter, and then a NASA jet. And the NASA jet couldn't make it all the way from Kazakhstan to Houston, had to stop for gas. And so when they said, hey, we're going to stop for gas, what do you want us to get you? It's a special treat. And I think maybe like Peggy, I said pizza, but we landed in Scotland. And that you know, they didn't invent pizza. And I love Scotland, but pizza is not their forte. And after all that time in space to come back, I have to have a Scottish pizza. I was disappointed with my first meal back on Earth.
Tell me you at least had a finger of Lagavulin or something.
No, yeah, the medical doctors are taking blood like crazy.
Oh, no fun.
No, we're not there.
This is going to wrap this up. This will be a wrap up on this. 2 thumbs up to NASA in regards to a successful mission up and a successful mission down. Space aviation. Going where no man has gone before. Good luck to all of us. And as we say, and we say again, peace be unto you. Shalom.